Hello, and you're listening to the Zone of Hot Truth, a podcast where we talk about our experiences, opinions, and hot takes in 15 minutes or less. I'm Kevin.
I'm Eric.
I'm John.
I'm Grant.
Okay, no blurbs today.
Yeah, no bullshit today. Big
we're
surprise.
We're going to go ahead and go right into the topic, which is going to be regarding handouts. And so these are the things that are either required reading, things like house rules, or optional reading, which often tends to be people's campaign settings. So why don't we go ahead and kind of go into what kind of things do we think a GM should use handouts for in a campaign?
So the campaign handout is the stuff that you want to get out of the way early, information that you want to get to your players before they even start thinking about character creation. What kind of setting are you in? Are you in Forgotten Realms? Are you in Greyhawk? Whatever. Are you in Homebrew? And help to formulate their expectations of where the campaign is going to go, as well as kind of giving you the idea of what you are like as a DM and some just general guidelines and rules, or at least that's how I do it.
And that sounds pretty comprehensive. Are there any other takes on that?
Yeah, I guess I'll throw mine in the ring. My primary focus with the pre-session handout is to kind of get players hooked and invested into the world. Because that's my primary concern with the handout. I try to save the house rules and stuff like that for later, so hopefully what I put in the handout just gets them engaged and hooked. So establish the tensions, the general setting and their starting environment, and just a few minor bullet points on politics, RP, and tactical level ideas that I like to run.
So I guess the big question is how do you get your players to give a fuck and read about that? Because I keep mine to I've just brought mine up, and I think my setting stuff is 4 bullet points, 6 lines in total. Because in my experience, they're just not going to read it, or they're going to skim it at best.
Those 4 bullet points I wrote, by the way.
That's factually.
I was like, oh, he's going to have a major point to know.
This is where everyone argues over where we all stole our ideas from out of the 4 of us.
I have a rumors section that I stole from you, but the 4 campaign bullet points, and think you wrote Ghost of Saltmarsh, you shit.
I think a big thing is setting up expectations. So as far as getting them to actually read it, my rule of thumb with a handout is it should be no longer than the aggregate character backstories that I'm expecting to receive. So if I have 4 players and they're each going to write me half a page of character backstory, my players should expect to receive 2 pages of setting backstory, because I'm taking enough of theirs and trying to weave it in. That's what I'm expecting from them, and they're buying into that ahead of time. They're knowing it's a character-driven game. They should expect to have that amount of reading ahead of time, because I'm going to read 2 pages of their stuff. But it's a metric of fairness in a way, and that's a way I keep myself in check. But the big metric as far as how to get the players to read it, it's a persistent problem, because a lot of, not even just a lot of DMs, but people in general do not write to engage people. They write for many purposes. They write to have lists. They write to remember stuff. They write to fill out a report. But they're not writing for the distinct purpose of engaging an individual. So it's very important to keep that in mind, is when you are writing your handout, each sentence should be carefully crafted for the purpose of why should that player give a single fuck about that sentence.
I mean, that's a really good point. It's back to I'm back in college all of a sudden, and the difference between it's easy to read a book versus hard to read a textbook, because fucking academics don't know how to write in a way that humans want to read or can read.
It's too dense.
Here's my hot take. Do I really have the most radical opinion here?
No,
you might. Let's hear it.
Definitely not.
Okay. I think handouts are generally horseshit, because you're not going to get your players to read them. It's So what I think regarding that is all of the things that you talk about are stuff you can do orally, because that's the only time you're going to make sure that actually people listen, because people are not going to read. You'll read it. You know what's in it. But I guarantee you, if you quiz a player on it, you're not going to know. They're going to be like, what town? So like maybe if you do things like you have to pick it down for character creation, but it'll still be like they'll skim it and pick something based on that, and that's all you're gonna get. What I think instead is like instead of focusing on like this is generally across not even just session 0 stuff. I think handouts are generally you probably shouldn't focus on it all unless you have extra time. I think it should only be something that is you focus on the characters, you focus on the world building, or not even the world building, just the plot, and then everything else, even if it's ass, the characters, the PCs will forgive you for. But that's just my hot take on that. So,
And actually, as a follow up to that, this might kind of bridge mine, Kevin, and Eric's kind of opinion on this. I think
see.
the handout is as much for it should be as much for the players as yourself. So if you carefully craft and like put a lot of thought and detail into what is going into the handout, so it's only the most engaging and relevant stuff, like Eric suggested, then hopefully anyone who does read it is going to be hooked and engaged with it, hopefully. And if not, it's
Nope.
really beneficial for you because you put in
Yeah.
the time to like really sit down and think about the starting state of your campaign, which is going to benefit the whole game.
Before I hit you, Eric, what I'm going to call that is that's your campaign Bible that the players don't see. That's about that. So anyway,
Yeah.
It's a matter of like when I say the advice as far as remember you are almost certainly not somebody who has practiced on writing to engage. That should not be a thing of well, if I just sit down and think harder about how to write this is going to turn out. The important thing is you should be cutting about 90% of what you're writing, unless you're totally cool with the idea of I'm writing my handout for me, and anything the players like kind of osmosis into themselves is
is
just
gravy.
is extra because you're not going to sit down and all of a sudden learn how to write a novel or learn how to write a actual engaging essay through D&D.
But I've watched all of Critical Role.
There you go. So I think there is like a kind of an interesting thing there of handouts are also useful to structure us, the DM's thoughts about getting into a game. It's kind of like a good checkbox of have I thought about what the world state is? Have I thought about what the politics are, like Grant said? Maybe I don't need to put anything in the handout because again, I do not believe the players are going to read it. I think I've had of the 9 players that I have had across 2 games, I think 2 players have actually out.
Yeah.
Other than during session 0 when I said, "All right, did you look at the handout to figure out how we're doing character creation?"
Blink, blink.
Blank, blank, blank. And then, "Oh yes, I have it here," and then pull it out and then looked at it. So if you want to say from the perspective of preparing to making sure you have stuff together, I can get behind that. But I don't think you're going to get, well, personally, I've never seen a player get engaged over what I put down on a piece of paper.
It's a safety blanket.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. So
We're like running out of time. We got 5
Yeah.
got like 5 minutes left. What do you put in this dang thing?
What's important is what is
Yeah.
important to the game you're going to run. If you're going to
What
run
is that?
Well, sure. So if you're going to run, for example, an intrigue-based politics game, you should have the politics in there.
Yeah.
If you are not running a game where the politics are the meat of the story, if I'm running not even just a dungeon crawl, but if I'm running an adventure where they're going to suddenly become the chosen group, politics are not important with that. What's important there is what is the big bad? What is the thing they're going to be engaging, especially at level 1, especially at level 2, or the early levels.
Yeah, and that's where
which I think is all stuff you can do orally.
And that's why I think in any handout, it doesn't hurt to have a section at the bottom where you just have a few bullet points of some of like the extra things, just at least to acknowledge that you've thought of it, like level of RP that you're hoping to see, tactical level, how high or low magic your world is, or how lethal or non-lethal. Even if it's just bullet points, just having some of those things there could be helpful.
Expectations, I think, is like actually a good point too, because you need to figure out the setting what the players will expect is very important, because it's the thing that I ask first when I don't get a handout is, all right, on a scale of Lord of the Rings to Monty Python, where are we? On a
Yeah.
scale of murder hobos to high investment, where are we? Because that's important. Because I'm I don't want to make a barbarian with 3 intelligence that knows only the blade for a game where we're gonna spend most of the time talking to NPC.
Yeah. I'm gonna keep beating that drum of like, man, I think that's something you said right at the beginning, like when you're talking about what this campaign is, and if they need to reference it, maybe that'll help then. But
I think it comes down to all what I try to use in my campaign handout. That's not for me because I write a decent amount of it for me, even though I would consider the actual written plot parts actually pretty important and vital. But the thing that I'm really looking to get is I'm trying to convey rules and house rules and things that I think are going to be problems for people, and I want to put them early on in their phase so they can formulate their thoughts. They can have their knee jerk reaction to be like, "I hate this. I'm really gonna complain about this." But now that because they've sat on it for a week, by the time they're at the table, they're much more willing to go along with it.
and I think that's probably the only thing I think that is probably the most relevant handout that should be given over the course of an entirety of a campaign is here are the rules that I'm playing the game by, and that's pretty much it. Because I think a lot of the RP and stuff will probably convey itself through the rules, or they'll ask a question about that regarding that. I think the other thing, so we didn't touch on it. I think we've really hit the kind of the core of the session 0 doc. But what about other documents in the campaign? So like, are those just like, that's just gravy? Like if I get to those, sure, but will they add something to the world or not? Like, what do we think about those?
I think those should be considered like icing on the cake. They definitely add to the world. Your players, if they even are halfway engaged, are going to love if you put down a map for every single town or a continent map with every single region having its own map. But they're definitely the icing on the cake. And I think there are things you should get to, but not necessarily prioritize.
So I'm in kind of a very different camp. I am the Wallace or Gromit, I can never remember which one's the dog, on the front of the train, putting down the train tracks as they go.
Yep.
I don't prepare anything until I know it's valuable, until I know it's going to get done. I have a, I think Eric put a good word to it, the campaign Bible of like a rolling list, or was it? I don't remember who it was. It's one of you idiots. A campaign Bible that has the list of like NPCs and locations and people that they've interacted with that are valuable.
I think that is
So
important. Having that kind of there's a Latin word for it, like dramatic the actors, the people who are on the stage that are not you, and seeing those names is a helpful primer.
It's
Mhm.
pieces. It's your knives. Turn in them later.
I think we're gonna go ahead and go to our final thoughts. So Eric,
I think my final thought would be that at first time as a DM for the first time, you should really try to keep it limited. As for people who are playing for the first time, keep it really limited because you really don't know the way the game is going to go. You could in your mind it could be a humorous game, and then 2 sessions into it, the tone is just completely changed, and you want to adapt to go with it. So don't write up a 200-page or even 5-page or even 2-page handout when you don't know what's happening initially and you don't know where things are going to go.
So I think, despite my hesitance about it being read, I do think it's very important to get down your rules as a DM, things that are different than your standard raw, your homebrew, how you'll be, the specifics of how you'll be creating characters, and general stuff that the players need to know to make their character. The type of campaign that it will be, how combat heavy, how intrigue, stuff that they need to keep in mind before they're creating the special character that they're going to bring to the character creation. It's
great.
important. It's helpful. At the very least, it's a good checkbox to make sure you have a good idea of your campaign before moving on.
I I agree with a lot of what they just said, so I won't say too much. I think you should keep it short, 1 or 2 pages. Try to keep it concise and only the relevant information. And I personally like to really focus on like the core or central tension for like the first arc of the game to try to get your players like invested in it. That can be hard to do, but that's what I like to do or attempt.
And I'll just end by saying if it's longer than a new tweet, right, at 280 characters, your players are probably not going to read it in any capacity. Rules are probably the biggest thing that you want to go over. I think also character creation, you can probably tie into a handout, and it's probably the only way I would see it. Like, here are the possible places you're from. Please pick one. It's probably like one of the only ways you probably get somebody to read. Like the town of Smorgasbord specializes in rice, right, or something like that. That's about it.
Calder is a farming community.
So... and all that bullshit. Well, anyway, thank you for listening, and keep rolling those dice.